you enjoyed dinner? So I've been asked to give only a very short introduction. So I'll give a very, very short introduction to Dr. Lúcia Lohmann, President and Director of Missouri Botanical Garden, Fellow of the Explorers Club, and Amazonian Explorer, here to talk to us about her research and the Amazon. Thank you so much, Lúcia.
Thank you. Is it? Yep. Is it good? Or this one? This one? Am I good? Okay, perfect. Okay. Thank you so much, Robbie, and thank you so much to all of you. It's such fun to be here. This is the best group ever. Explorers, what else do we want, really? And so I thought today I was going to talk about one of our most fun expeditions, which has been to some completely unknown mountains in the Amazon basin, really talking about places that nobody has ever been and nobody was ever able to get back to it after we left. But before doing that, I thought I'd give a little brief summary on our research in the Amazon. Brief summary so you know, how did we ever even get to those mountains? And I thought I would start by mentioning that Latin America is the place with the highest biodiversity on Earth. It actually has twice as many species as all the other places on Earth. And this was one of the papers by Dr. Peter Raven that we're still recovering at the garden, and one of his 808 papers, which is really quite remarkable. And so within Latin America, the Amazon basin is also the place with highest biodiversity. And just as a reminder, so Amazon basin, we estimate it has around 40,000 species of angiosperms, which, if we think about, to put it into perspective, in 1 hectare in the Amazon, we have as many species as we have throughout the entire Europe. So quite a few species of plants, including some of the largest tree species, such as Denisia excelsa, which can reach around 300 feet. Lots of economically important plants, 2.5 million insects, which are crucial pollinators, really crucial for our own survival. Around 350 species of primates. And these go from the tiniest primates, such as the pygmy marmosets, to some of the biggest primates, such as the holler monkeys. Around 800 species of amphibians and reptiles, including some of the most spectacular, also some of the most poisonous sometimes, amphibians, and also lots of really interesting reptiles. These are not my favorites. Around 1,500 species of birds, including lots of manakins and macaws and toucans, and the harpy eagle, which reaches around 2.5 meters and 25 pounds. Imagine a bird, 25 pounds. That's quite something. Around 3,000 fish species, including the arapaima, that is around 10 feet and 450 pounds. What about that? But even though these are the species that we know in the Amazon today, we estimate that only around 10% of the species have been described, which is really incredible. When we conducted a study a while back looking at what we know about the Amazon basin, you can see this very pale map over here showing biodiversity knowledge. This is the predicted biodiversity, and these are the knowledge gaps. So we have more knowledge gaps than knowledge itself about the Amazon basin. And so still lots of exploration to do in the Amazon and in Brazil as a whole, which might help you understand how a young little girl in Brazil that loved being outside, always trying to find a tree to climb, decided to follow a career in botany. And from there, when I was age 17, decided I wanted to be a botanist, and then my life became with exploration. There were no cell phones in those days. My mom was not too happy with some of those expeditions, but lots of field work ever since. And a lot of this field work was really to produce a lot of flora treatments. And when I was a little girl in Brazil, we essentially had no books to tell us what the species were. So the first step was really to produce all these treatments to get to know our biodiversity. The questions started to become more and more complex, and ultimately it led me to coordinate this project entitled The Assembly and Evolution of the Amazonian Biota and Its Environment. And this was a project we started back in 2012 with funding from NASA, from National Science Foundation, and FAPESP. Over 100 people in our team, and our goal was really to come up with the new syntheses on the origin and evolution of the Amazonian biodiversity. We wanted to know why this place on Earth had so many species, more species than any other place on Earth. So we embarked on a research study where we combined information from phylogenetics, so using genomics and to produce evolutionary trees of a bunch of Amazonian organisms, geology, remote sensing, geochemistry, historical biogeography. And we also decided to look at the biota as a whole. So even though I'm a botanist, I partnered with a series of zoologists in this project, and we wanted to go back to sort of the Humboldtian approach and do field work looking at everything. So looking at birds, primates, butterflies, the geology, and really looking at Amazonia as a whole. So our project had four main components. The first one was the inventory. So we still had lots of field work to do. And so for many years, collecting in many different regions of Brazil, in Brazilian Amazonia, which led to many new species. In fact, I don't think I've been to any field expedition in the Amazon where we didn't come back with new species. Every single trip, we come back with new species. And here's a little taste of how fieldwork in the Amazon looks like. And I know there's somebody over there who does work in the Rio Negro, so you'll enjoy this. É uma aromácea, tá vendo? Tem todos os capelos separados. Eu acho que no campo é onde surgem minhas melhores ideias de pesquisa. E o trabalho científico tem muito de criatividade, né? A gente tem que estar encontrar também quais são as perguntas interessantes. Por que será que nessa margem do rio tem uma espécie que a gente não está encontrando na outra margem do rio? Por que será que naquela margem do rio aquela espécie está com fruto e na outra não? Por que a gente tem espécies com flores cor-de-rosa, flores amarelas, flores brancas, frutos grandes, frutos pequenos, folhas com morfologias diferentes? So this was a lot of our daily routine, just going out, collecting plants, and learning about the world out there. The second component of our project was genetics. And for this component of the work, we would get all the organisms we were collecting and do genomic sequencing of those organisms. And we would build time-calibrated phylogeny. So essentially, these are evolutionary trees. Imagine genealogies using genomic data that were really crucial because they allow us to understand the history of these organisms. So doing field work, genomics, the third component of our project was geology, which was really to understand the history of the environment in the Amazon basin. So we collected quite a bit of information from stalactites, and these are incredibly precise. They really allow us to infer past precipitation patterns, which was sort of to reconstruct the past climate in the Amazon. And this data so allowed us to understand, for example, how was the past precipitation pattern in the Amazon? How was the past climate in the Amazon? How was the past vegetation in the Amazon? And by combining all this information, we're able to understand climate change and to really reconstruct past paleoclimates and paleovegetation in the Amazon. And this was really important because it allowed us to look at the genealogies, the evolutionary trees of those organisms, go back in time, but also reconstruct how was the vegetation, how was the climate, and how were, the different environment components of the environment back then. And then we would combine all the information into a biogeographical synthesis. So getting our evolutionary trees and really producing a new synthesis on how did the Amazon form over 100 million years. There's lots of papers out there, and if you're really interested in the science, I can direct you to the papers themselves. But what I'm going to do here is just to tell you the pitch, the elevator pitch, the story, and what came out of all of those studies, so we can get into the Amazonian mountains and talk about exploration. So there's lots of different papers that I can direct you to, that you can actually see the details of those studies. But what I want you to remember in terms of the history of the Amazon basin is that at around 100 million years, there were big dinosaurs like that one walking around South America, and especially the Amazon basin. At around 90 million years, birds evolved in South America. The origin of birds is South America, at the core of the Amazon basin. This is their origin. So this is in the late Cretaceous, around 90 million years. If you go back to your, maybe Bio 101 from high school, you might remember that then there was a mass extinction around 65 million years ago, when huge proportions of biodiversity went extinct on Earth, including those big dinosaurs. After the mass extinction, plants diversified extensively in the Amazon basin. Because imagine, before that, you had these huge dinosaurs walking around. Once they're gone, plants really flourished. Around 60 million years ago, after the mass extinctions, plants diversified extensively in the Amazon basin. And then around 50 million years, we have the origin of a bunch of insects in the Amazon. And through coevolution, plants and insects diversified extensively. One fun fact about the Amazon that a lot of people don't know is that the Amazon River used to flow from east to west. We then have the uplift of the Andes in Western South America, and the river is flowing, but the uplift of the Andes prevents the water from continuing into the ocean. This led, around 23 million years ago, to the formation of a major lake, Lake Pebas, in Western South America, that in turn, we see major giant fauna diversifying and originating in that region. So by 3 million years ago, we had giant caimans and crocodiles. I mean, we're talking this distance, walking through the Amazon. Primates originated in Africa. They got to South America, And at around 20 million years, they start diversifying in the Amazon basin too. By that time, the lake became so big that the river actually changed course and started flowing opposite direction. So the Amazon River, we usually say it flows backwards because it was going this way, Andes, major lake, and then eventually it turns back and started flowing in the opposite direction. At around this time, 8.5 million years ago, is when the formation of the Amazon River drainage actually starts to settle. And the rivers in the Amazon became a major driver of speciation. So in most places, also if you go back to your biology 101, imagine you have a species, large population, their distribution. Usually we have a barrier that is usually, let's say, a mountain, divides these two populations. Over time, you accumulate all these different genetic differences and you have two species. In the Amazon River drainage is what drove most of the speciation within the last, between 5 million years, which is when the Amazon River drainage finally truly settled. We have all the genetic data to back this out, but not going to go into details. So a lot of the species that we see in the Amazon today, they're actually young, and they were formed over the last 5 million years. So in other words, the Amazon basin has very old roots with biodiversity going back to 100 million years, a lot of extinction, and the species that are in the Amazon today, they are actually much younger, and a lot of them around 5 million years, which is really quite interesting. So this is the work of 2 decades, and I'm telling you the cartoon story and what you need to remember. And if you're really interested, I can direct you to the actual publication so you can read and get all the details. This is our Amazon team. But as science goes, usually you do a research project and it actually leads to more questions, right? And one of the things that emerged in our Amazon project is, so as we sequence the DNA and we produce those evolutionary trees, one thing that we saw over and over is that a lot of the early diverging lineages, so some of these initial lineages in different clades, and you see the blue color, we saw that their origin was in this blue region of the Amazon. So we kept thinking, what is so special about this region? That there are so many lineages that their origin goes back to this region. It turns out we have very little information about this region, which is what then led us to the following project, which was to explore mountains completely unknown to science in this region. We planned 3 different expeditions. The first one to the Pico da Neblina. Pico da Neblina is a place that has been visited by people multiple times, but we wanted to go to some areas that had not been visited much. Second expedition to the Serra do Imeri, also some locations that had never been visited before. And the third one, to Lutuloi, that we plan to visit in November. Just this morning, our team back in Brazil was with the Brazilian army going through the region, trying to find a place for us to land and establish our campground. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But let's start with, okay, what was the objective of this overall, of these different expeditions? The first was, okay, sample plants, reptiles, amphibians, birds, and mammals from these completely unknown mountain ranges in the Amazon. Second, to improve our knowledge on the biogeographic history of the Amazon basin and its relationship with other biomes in South America, including the Andes, the Guiana Shields, and Brazilian Atlantic forest. And third, to also collect physiological data from species living in these high mountain ranges to inform predictions about how these species' tolerance to climate change would be. So here we go. First expedition, Pico da Neblina, back in 2017. We wanted to go to some areas within Yanomami territory. The first step was to ask for permission to the Yanomamis. Well, actually not the first step. The first step was years of permits and all the paperwork from, the Brazilian government. But then after that, we had to actually get permission from the Yanomamis themselves. The Yanomamis, they believe that they don't go above 1,000 meters. They feel this is they don't go more than that. They think this is for the dead. So they stay below. And we told them, do you want to come? They're like, no, we're not going there. Good luck. And the only way to get to some of those places were with really assistance from the Brazilian army. This is the military base in Maturacá. Part of the team up there in Pico da Neblina. And this was between 1,900 and 3,000 meters. Very diverse vegetation, lots of forest, also some of these rocky outcrops, and very unique flora and fauna. Overall in this trip were collected 1,500 specimens of plants, representing 308 species, 700 specimens of amphibians and reptiles, representing more than 100 species, 250 species of birds. Something strange with that number, anyway. And 90 specimens of small mammals and 18 species documented. We got back. The first step was to do a checklist of the region and produce an overall inventory, make it available through databases so people could have access to all this data. And for the botanist in the audience, these were the most diverse plant families we found. And there's the biggest Rubiaceae expert from all times. Rubiaceae was the third most important plant family, 50 species in the region. Fabaceae, the legumes, 80 species, Melastomataceae, Bromeliaceae, the bromeliads, Myrtaceae, lots of really interesting plant species. Sorry, Shirley, I don't see Latracy here. Pico da Neblina alone, there has been 47 species named after this region. Lots of endemic flora, very unique species in the region. Not only unique species of plants, but also unique species of amphibians and reptiles, and many new species. But not just new species. So here are 2 new species that were described of vertebrates, which is already a difficult thing to happen, new species of vertebrates. But out of this expedition, were also described new genera of vertebrates, which is something very hard to happen, and 2 new frog families. So describing new families of frogs, of vertebrates, it's something pretty hard these days. Second expedition, Serra do Imeri, and this was back, November 2022. So this was the Pico da Neblina, Serra do Imeri was right here, and this region is separated by 2 main rivers, which really makes, it's the river Caubari and Maruia, and it makes all the biota that is in this region very unique, very isolated from other places. We left from São Paulo, went to Manaus. In Manaus, we had the partnership with the Brazilian Army, so we had to go through jungle warfare instruction at this center, safety training with the Brazilian Army. From Manaus, we took a small plane to Santa Isabel do Rio Negro, which is a little further up. Beautiful vegetation on the way. So we usually hear a lot about all the destruction in the Amazon and so forth, but it's kind of amazing. You fly hours, like, and just forest, 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 forest. So still lots and lots, thank God, pristine forest. This was our metropolis where we stayed, Santa Isabel do Rio Negro. There's a small airport. And from there, we had to take, the helicopter with the army to get to the Serra do Imiri. It's very challenging to get there because for helicopters to drive, and there see some people with experience with the army over there, you need to have, for the helicopter to take off, you can't have any clouds. And for helicopter to go all the way up, you also cannot have any clouds. So this is what was really challenging because we had this to go very high up. And so this is why the trip had to happen in November. There's this short window when the helicopter is actually able to go. So here, it felt like people at the bases of the Himalayas waiting to see when they can go up. And this is where we stayed for 5 days. Every day we would try to go, come back, no. Try to go, come back, no. But eventually, we succeeded. And we made it. Very happy. So the helicopter, they couldn't really land because the terrain is very soft. If they landed, they would probably never be able to take off again. So, just getting everything out, heavy equipment, and the army set this very nice campground for us. Beautiful, beautiful location. A big challenge was finding a place where we could even get close to the floor, because here we are talking about forest, and you would just go and it's forest, 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 forest. Very few places where the helicopter could even get close. So we kept looking for these areas with bromeliads, and which took 8 different trips from the army before our trip to find one location in the middle of this Serra do Imiri where we could actually land. Here's the whole team. And then we got to spend 12 days over there collecting every day. In the upper portion, so lots of bromeliads, open vegetation, really cool droseras, and lots of carnivorous plants. And at some of the upper portions, we would then on a daily basis also go into the middle of those forests, which was very challenging because these are very steep slopes. So we had to go down with rappel and collect plants. "12 days collecting plants, and well, all the zoologists in the team also collecting different things. So we'd spend all the day out collecting plants and then come back and press them in our tent, and sometimes till 3, 4 in the morning, pressing plants to make sure we could go early again in the following day. Team of botanists, team of 2, me and Rafaela Forza, who's actually the curator of the herbarium in Rio de Janeiro Botanical Garden. We collected 1,200 specimens representing 300 plant species. So it's actually not a huge diversity of plant species, but very unique species. Herpetologists collected 160 specimens representing 16 species of amphibians, also 100 specimens approximate of reptiles representing 12 species. Again, not huge diversity, but very, very unique biota, including Neblinafrini imeri. So this was a new genus that was named from this region, one new species from Imeri, and the other species, Mayeri. This was the person in the army who actually made it all happen. So got a species in his honor. The ornithologist in the team, also around 160 specimens representing 25 species of birds, including a new species of owl, which was really cool. Very, very unusual. I'm so sad I didn't have a photo to show. The mammologist in the team, around 70 specimens representing 8 species of small mammals, including this very cute fellow over here. And we also had a team of parasitologists, and they were collecting blood samples from the different vertebrates and with new and parasites. Also collecting invertebrates, which also led to some really cool new beetle species that were described, and also a new crab genus from the region. So we usually talk about new species, and here we're talking about new genera and new families, which is really not a very common thing. So in sum, from the Imeri, so dozens of new species, several new genera, and 2 new families of vertebrates. We now have all the specimens and the genetic material from those species that are crucial to our understanding of the biogeography of Latin America. And it was also interesting that the amphibians from those mountains, they actually are living very close to the maximum temperatures that they can tolerate. So this means that these taxa have very high chances of going extinct if even under small temperature increases. And really, these expeditions really allowed us to fill in completely blank pages about Amazonian biodiversity. Very successful expedition. Not as great final. In my last day, I fell from a tree, broke 6 ribs, but I'm here. And here's a little taste.
A biodiversidade é o maior tesouro que nós planeta eu compararia a biodiversidade à quantidade de informação que é infinitamente maior que toda aquela que existe em todas as bibliotecas do mundo juntas, né? Só que a gente não conhece a maior parte das coisas.
A gente estima que tem mais de 40.000 espécies na Amazônia como um todo. Of plants. E a maior parte dos trabalhos na Amazônia com plantas são nas terras baixas, mas a flora das montanhas da Amazônia, elas são muito pouco conhecidas por conta da dificuldade de acesso.
Os Yanomamis disseram para o pessoal do deserto, não só que eles nunca tiveram aqui, como eles não querem ir. E dá para entender por que agora, né? Essas montanhas altas da Amazônia são muito importantes, são muito interessantes, e pela própria dificuldade de se conhecer bem a diversidade delas, cada oportunidade que a gente tem se torna cada vez mais relevante. Então, nós estamos inventariando uma área onde provavelmente ninguém pensou, ninguém fez nenhum inventário de biodiversidade. E conhecer a biodiversidade é conhecer informação desconhecida, a gente desconhece o que tem. A gente está correndo contra o relógio, né? Porque a gente tem perdido muito mais espécies do que nós temos sido capazes de escrever. Né?
descrevê-las é super importante, a gente precisa dar nome a essas entidades, porque sem nome é difícil conservar. Muito é importante que a gente consiga descrevê-las com uma certa velocidade, né, que a gente possa dar origem a esses planos, né, de conservação, né, especialmente nessa área tão remota, né, que a gente vai ter muitas coisas únicas aqui.
O tesouro da humanidade está na biodiversidade, está na informação abrigada pela biodiversidade e das quais nós vamos aproveitar cada vez mais. Isso depende de tecnologia, isso depende de conhecimento científico. Isso é extremamente importante. Nós temos que preservar a nossa biodiversidade o máximo possível.
Well, somehow it is that we actually had some documentarists who went with us in the field, and there is a documentary. So maybe, Robbie, I don't know if there's a way we could distribute with passwords so people can go in and see the whole documentary, which is pretty interesting. And just to wrap up, as of this morning, this past week, they've been going with the Brazilian Army to try to find a place where we can land for the next expedition. And as I said, the challenge really is forest, forest, forest everywhere. And where can we find a place for the helicopter to land? So it's been the whole week, and just this morning, going through the whole area, trying to find a place where we could potentially land and where we could potentially establish the campground in November. And literally, as of this morning, they're like, okay, we found it. They found a region, an area with open camp where we could land in the expedition in November. So now starting to prepare things. Let's see if I'm really able to go, but I'm hoping that, Robbie and others will keep the fort, and Charlotte and Roy will keep the fort at the garden, so I can go on a 2-week expedition and bring back some more samples. This is the team from the Serra do Imeri. So we had 14 scientists, and then we had 20 people from the Army. So it was multiple trips, and just get to see these absolutely stunning places with really so unique biodiversity. So I think I'll stop there and take any questions in case there are any. Yes.
That was fascinating, and I have 2 questions. I've been fishing on the Amazon 3 times.
Ooh.
Rio Negro and the Jarabacoa. And you
Fantastic.
chose that area because there's no mosquito.
Uh-huh.
But it's all tenant.
Uh-huh.
So, but if there's no insects, how do these animals survive? And the second question is, it was so hot that we said, even though we love this place, after the 3rd time, we just can't get away from the heat. But up there, I'll bet you it was really lovely temperate.
Yeah, the temperature was lovely, and the secret really is choosing the good time to go to the Amazon, right? So it's funny, we usually say in winter it rains every day. In summer it rains all day long. So now is beginning of winter, June, which is the ideal time to go. Because it's beginning of winter, the temperatures are not so high, there's not as much rain, and so June is the time to go. Go back fishing in June.
You were going in September, October. But it was so hot, the only way to get away from the heat was jumped into the river, and then the little piranha started chewing.
Ooh.
I love this talk. I'm so happy that you're running the botanic garden.
Oh, thank you. Tom?
Yeah, there have been significant governmental changes in Brazil since your first expedition, and I'm wondering if the changes in government have affected the cooperation on which you depend to get help from the Brazilian army doing this. I mean, has that affected your research?
Wow, and that's an excellent question. That was the one thing we were so worried about, because we did the previous ones under the previous government, and we were really worried to see what would happen. But thankfully, everything continued to run well, and we continue to have those partnerships with the current government. Some good news recently is deforestation in the Amazon in the past year decreased substantially, which is also very good for all of us. As I usually say, what happens in the Amazon in terms of climate and everything impacts everywhere else around the globe. Yes.
It's fascinating to see how much knowledge you collected from this. But I wonder, based on your long history in this area, at the end of your most recent expedition, what's something that you know now that you didn't know at the beginning of this most recent expedition?
Excellent question. And well, so this whole region, really the flora, we had, well, in the fauna, no idea. And one of the core questions was really that, is really the place of the birth of a lot of the lineages from the Amazon basin. We haven't finished all the genetic studies, but all of our studies are indicating to that. So I didn't get to show that, but some of our hypotheses also about forests throughout South America that emerged from the Amazon project is that South America was covered with forest around 60 million years ago, so one continuous forest. At around 30 million years ago, in the Oligocene, when the climates were drier and when we had cooler temperatures, this is when we have sort of the dry diagonal forming in the middle of South America, separating these continuous forests into the Amazon and the Atlantic forest. So through our project, we started calling the origin of the Amazon at 30 million years. And one question we had was, what is the affinity of those species in these northern portions? Are they related to the Atlantic forest? And we are seeing a lot of those connections. And they all kind of match also the 30 million year, suggesting that when the dry diagonal formed, what was once continuous, broadly distributed species, there was this division that led to speciation. So this trip on its own, it's really allowing us to test further some of the hypotheses that we came out with genomic data and so forth, and really get a complete new additional piece of the puzzle of the history of the Amazon. Lotzi?
Did you bring home all the species and put them in formaldehyde and put the insects in boards with pins?
So we have collections from, all the different organisms, and we distributed through different museums also. So they're available in different locations, and really, I mean, what we did in that expedition in 12 days, now we have decades of work. And in some ways, it's really reconstructing the past and planning for the future.
Can I ask you a question? The lack of insect life, the Rio Negro, how did that affect the variety of species?
Yeah.
No insects.
Excellent question. So the Rio Negro is actually very poor in terms of the number of species. So it's very sandy soil and not very diverse in the number of species. But the lack of mosquitoes is so good, right? Because in the Amazon basin, the mosquitoes sometimes come with additional things. And so we even have an upcoming trip to the Amazon, and we're going to Rio Negro, which is, so safe to go and so pleasant. So it's a wonderful place to go. Ted.
One reads that in the Portuguese colonial era, they discovered in the Amazon enormous cities that were highly populated. And one asked the question, where are they today? What have you seen that indicates any of this being true? And if so, how is it no longer talked about?
Excellent question. And it's unbelievable. So until today, there's so many indigenous tribes that are completely uncontacted in the Amazon basin. We have around 24 million people who live in the Amazon. And now using LiDAR, and well, we have somebody here with an expertise on that too, we're able to go back and identify some of these locations where these cities were. And there's also what we call the Terra Preta, which is, where they were able to come up with areas that were not as nutritious, let's say, in terms of soil, and exactly, that allowed them to have these incredibly rich regions where they grew many different plant species. Another really interesting thing is there are even species that we eat nowadays. So cupuaçu, which I don't know, it's Theobroma grandiflora, the species. So everybody knows Theobroma cacao, which is chocolate, and Theobroma grandiflora, which is a close relative of cacao. One study from University of São Paulo, where I was before, a graduate student there was able to show that Theobroma cupuaçu was actually domesticated and created by the local indigenous communities. And one thing I often say is when we think, okay, why does this matter, right? And in terms of biodiversity and so forth. And there's some numbers in terms of biodiversity that I'm still surprised. And even when I think about, so if we think that there are around 400,000 species of plants out there, around 350,000 angiosperms, and once we add vascular plants and bryophytes and everything else, around 400,000. Of those, we use 0.5% as medicines. The 0.5 that we use corresponds to 25% of the medicines that we use on a daily basis. 1/4 comes from 0.5 plant species. And the same thing when we think about food crops. So 3 food crops correspond to 50% of the calories that we consume around the world. So can you guess what those 3 species are? 3 plant species that represent 50% of the calories? Corn, rice, and that's it. And 90% of the calories come from 30 plant species. So imagine the potential that is out there and that we're not even close to looking into. As an article by Peter Raven, the title of his article was Saving Plants, Saving Ourselves. And that's really it.
A great presentation. We're so lucky to have you in St. Louis.
Oh.
It's fantastic. After the November trip, do you think your research will you do more of these in the future? Is that the plan? And also, are you getting any support from the Explorers Club? It seems like this ought to have a flagged mission attached to it.
We should think about that.
I'm sure there'll be a lot of people excited to support that.
We'll see how much field work I get to do. But I have a fantastic team at the garden, and they can take care of the fort. And I'm really a field biologist at heart. I mean, that's really, I just love being out in the field. And so I hope I get to continue and do some work. Nowadays, I don't get to do as much work myself, but I still have my around 30 graduate students that worked with me in Brazil PhD and masters, and now they're all over the world. And we continue to work on syntheses and so forth. Have my first PhD student at WashU. So I'm hoping that through this collaborative network with students and everyone at the garden that we'll be able to continue, that I'll be able to continue doing some science too. I should be able to have some fun too, right? It's like, yeah.
One follow-up on that. It's so cool to hear from someone who's not only such an explorer, but also a scientist, but also an executive. And so I wonder if you could talk about what are the takeaways from this work that you bring to your work as the president of the garden.
And I guess one big thing is the spirit of collaboration, really. When you're out in the field, you're looking for each other on a daily basis. Where are you going? What are you doing? And everybody has each other's back. And it's really about what we can do collectively. So that's something I see a lot. Well, for people who are outdoorsy, who love expeditions and so forth, there is that spirit, right? Just what we can do together, always looking out for each other. And I feel the magnitude of the work when we think about plants, right? So we're saying 400,000 species. We think just 1/10 have been described. And the magnitude of the work is also something, it's not possible for a single person or a single institution. So I think it brings the collaborative spirit, not just within the garden and what we can all accomplish together, but also with all of our partners. And then putting into perspective, not just the garden, but the other cultural institutions in St. Louis and the hospitals and all the different institutions. And this is where I feel like St. Louis couldn't be better positioned, right? We have the cultural institutions. We have such amazing healthcare, really, one of the best in the world. And then there's all the startups. And so I feel the curiosity, the spirit of discovery, and the collaboration, and what we can all do together.
What I'm amazed is as you travel through these thick forests, some of the poisonous insects, whatever that you come in contact with, I mean, you don't know what you're walking on, or whatever. How do you deal with that?
Yeah.
I mean, we're concerned about the tips nowadays.
Yeah.
You know, one little thing. If you go out in that forest, you've got all these different species out there. I mean, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, and I have to say, I look back and think about some of the trips that I did, and I'm like, if it was my daughter, I would not let her do. In some ways, the trips with the Army were the safest trips ever. So in my days as graduate student, we get, did you see some of those metal boats? I would go in with a bag of canned food, my field assistant, a month in Acre, just upriver, and then it's a region that there's lots of jaguars. So we would stop at the house of the rubber tappers and with our hammocks and say, can you let us hang our hammock and sleep inside? And quite a few adventures. Like, for example, we got to one house at a rubber tapper, and he said, oh, I'm so glad you're here, lady, because my wife went to the city, and I just, hunted this big tapir. Can you cook us for dinner? I'm not known for being a good cook, but I managed to do something. So in some ways, and I was lucky, and there has been some accidents, like, falling from a tree, breaking ribs. In the Amazon, there are these ants that we call tucandeiras. They are big ants, solitary. And I've been bitten by those. Oh my gosh, like really high fever. And, but this was while climbing a tree. And the plant group that I work on, these are climbing plants. So for me to collect my plants, I had to early on learn how to climb trees. And I guess my childhood adventures up in trees helped me out too. But Yeah, there has been quite a few expeditions. One with people from the garden. When I was a graduate student back in 2001, we decided to go to Suriname with Bruce Allen and Randy Evans. And we went to Suriname, and we wanted to go to the Tafelberg Tepui. Small airplane dropped us there. No GPS in those days. Go. So we spent 3 days hiking up, trying to find our way to the Tafelberg, carrying our freeze-dried food that we got at Whole Foods. But I never thought about it. And some people would ask, but weren't you scared? Or no, I always felt this was my happy place, and somehow things worked out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Lots of stories.